Hi there, Sugar Snaps. If you want to learn how to create Linocut blocks like these ones here and create prints on fabric or paper, I'm going to show you how to do that today. So to get started, we'll go over some tools and materials, starting with a piece of Linocut block material. So this is a very thin 1/8" piece of Linocut block. Linocut block comes in a soft, medium, or hard. I have 3 different hardnesses of linoleum here, starting with the hardest. This is a hard linoleum block. It creates a crisp design when you carve into it. The edges are nice and hard, and so as you carve into it, it's harder to carve into, but it's good for crisp, fine details if you want to do smaller designs that have lots of detail. This is great for printing on paper. You can also print on fabric with it, but it creates a crisper image on paper. Then there's this easy cut block. I got this from Dick Blick Art Materials online, and it's slightly easier to carve than the hard block, but it still maintains the crisp line, and it's good for fine details and broader details while being easier to carve. And then finally, a soft rubber. This is a thicker rubber, and it's very soft, easy to work with. Not as good for fine details, but good for large blocks for printing on fabric. To cut my linoleum block into the shape and size I want, I have a cutting board and a box knife, as well as a quilting ruler to measure out the size that I want. I've got a piece of paper and a pencil to work on my design, as well as markers and a paint palette with watercolors and paintbrushes, my cup of water for the watercolor. I have the Speedball Linocut carving tool with the blades. The blades are stored in the handle, which is pretty cool. You can store them in there for when you want to use them. And the tip unscrews, and you slide in a blade into the tip and then tighten it to hold it in place. We'll be using that. I have a tracing kit. This is a sewing tracing kit. It has sheets of paper that have a thin dusting of chalk. This is great for transferring your design to the rubber material so that then you can carve around it. A pair of scissors are always handy, and you'll need your fabric and your inks if you're going to do the print at the end. But today we'll focus on carving the block. Okay, the first thing you'll need to carve your own Linocut is a design. And creating your own design can be challenging if you are not a artsy design person. The design is the hardest part for me in lino cutting, because coming up with something original and creative that's beautiful can be a challenge. So I have a couple suggestions to make this process easier. You can take a piece of paper and cut it into shapes like circles, hearts, leaves, triangles, different sorts of shapes, and lay them out on your surface to create a design on your work surface, and then transfer that onto a piece of paper, and then transfer that onto the block print material. Or you can go online and find inspiration doing a search for whatever topic it is you're looking for. This bird print that I did some research on bird images and used those to create my own sketch of a bird to create on my block print. This one is a super simple, using the geometric shapes, just creating a circle inside a circle. And then this one, I used the style of tiles, prints on tiles, to create this more detailed piece for a costume project. And so you can create a variety of different types of blocks, simple or more complex, depending on what you're going to use it for and how detailed you want it to be. Another way to practice coming up with block print designs and Linocut designs is to use markers and watercolor to create designs on a piece of paper. And the reason I suggest watercolor and markers, or especially large tipped thick-tipped markers is because you'll be working in negative and positive space when lino cutting. You're going to be either carving away the part that your design is or the part that's the background of your design. Here we remove the negative space on this design, so the background, the negative space, is all carved out. And in this one, we remove the positive space, so the design that we were creating, that's the part of the rubber that we removed. So as an example to show you how to use a marker, I'll pull out my marker here, and I'm going to go in with a pencil really quick just to kind of sketch in what I'm thinking. I'm just going to do a quick little fern here because it's simple, it's very basic. Just do a little stem. Okay, so I have a little fern, and if you haven't seen my making a rubber stamp video, check it out here, and I go over how to carve this fern as a rubber stamp. Okay, so to show the difference between positive and negative space, when you're working with a positive space, you'll be carving the area around the fern. So the area of the fern that's colored in gets left behind. This is the raised portion of the Linocut. So the part in the purple will get left behind, and the white background gets carved away. So as an example, we have these concentric circles, and there's the raised circle that is the part that got printed, this raised portion. And the part that's still white, that's the part I carved away. And so the positive space is the part that's printed, negative space is the part that's left, the color of the material behind it. Today I have this design that I want to carve onto a block, and I want it to be about the size of this paper. And so I'm going to use this design, transfer it onto another piece of paper to make it larger. I used designs that I found online as inspiration to create this. Don't copy other people's work because that can be a copyright issue, but you can use it as inspiration to create your own pieces. And this was just a combination of different elements that I saw in other pieces of art that I combined together to create this design. And I started with this diamond shape in the middle that everything kind of built off of. And so if there's a shape that you enjoy, I enjoyed this diamond shape, you can start with that and then build off of that as another idea for creating your design. Okay, so now I'm going to fold a piece of paper in half and start transferring this design to my piece of paper. And I want it to look hand-drawn. I want it to be somewhat sketchy, but have some sense of symmetry. So I'm going to create a line in the center of my paper to kind of base off of, and add in my circles here on the outside so that I have placement, and then a circle here and a circle here. So I'm adding these circles to the outside of the design so that I hold those spaces. And then I'm going to go in and create the round corners. Okay, and then connect them here. And the nice thing is that you can always go in and erase and make corrections. Okay, so now I'm going to add the small circles. And here I didn't leave enough space for small circles, so I'm going to pull those slightly closer. And I can always add those to the block later. So I'm going to add one to each end. And then I'll add two small ones here. Okay, so then I'm going to do the interior of the diamond, creating my frame, and then my circles down the center, like so. Okay, and then start creating the center design. like this. Create the large leaf, and then the smaller leaves. I want this one at more of an angle, so. You might find that when you're drawing, especially trying to draw in symmetry, drawing on one side compared to the other is different, so you might need to rotate your paper to get the same angle. Like here, I have the leaf going at this angle, and here trying to do it with the paper in the same place, my leaf kind of gets wonky, and so I can switch it around, flip around my paper, and more accurately place that leaf like so on the other side. So sometimes rotating your paper will help you to get your design transferred the way you want it to be. Okay, so there's that side. Now I'll work on this side here. So I'll put in my circles down the center first. And I'm typically building in the framework of the design and then working from the center outwards so that I'm building off of something as I'm working. So now I'll get one leaf here, and then here I'm going to switch it around to do the leaf on the other side so that I get generally the same placement. Again, I want this to look hand drawn, so it doesn't need to be perfectly symmetrical. None of us are, so why I tried to make art that way. It has its place. Okay, and then a big leaf in the center here. And then switch it around to do the other side. And that got really wonky right there. That leaf definitely is not where I want it to be. This one's pretty good, but this leaf isn't where I want it to be. So go in, try that again. Okay, that's better. And you can fiddle around with it as much as you want, trying to get your shapes the same size, different location. This is why we do it in pencil first, so that you can get your design hammered out before carving it. Okay, I want this leaf to come up more to a point, so I'm going to erase that. Okay, and then I have a lot of little leaves, little kind of teardrop shapes around the edge here. So I'll go in and sketch those in now. Okay, so there are all the elements transferred to this piece of paper. So I have my small original image into my larger image that I can transfer to the block. Okay, so now you'll want to transfer your design to your block material, your Linocut material. And before I do that, I want to cut out a piece of the block to the size that I need for this design. So I'm going to take my quilting ruler and lay it over the edge. So I'll find my 1, put it into the corner of my paper, and I'm working with a 5.5 by 8.5 inch size. So I'll note that here for reference. And then I'll come in here and I'm going to use off of this corner, cut out a 5.5 by 8.5 inch piece. So I've got my 5.5 line down to my 8.5 line, square it up along that the edges, and then trace in lines there. So there's my lines transferred, and now use your box cutter to cut out that rectangle or whatever shape it is you're using. If you're working with a circle shape like this block here, you can cut around the outside of the circle shape. The closer you are to the design, the less you'll have to carve away, the less block you'll be wasting. But you can also have excess around the outside if you want extra to print onto your fabric. So this one I have a lot of excess space because I wasn't sure what I was going to do around this design, and you can see that printed onto the material here. I just kept the paint in this general area when I was working with it, but here I made it so that the background showed through a bit in the carving process, and so the paint pops out a bit as well. So carving or cutting a piece that's either the size of your design or slightly larger, depending on the outcome you want. And when working with a box knife, just be careful that you cut away from yourself or away from your body so that you don't accidentally slip and cut yourself. Okay, so here's my piece. I'm gonna put my cover back on, set this aside. So now I'm gonna work on my cutting board to hold it steady. Okay, so there are two different ways you can transfer your design onto your block. And this design is gonna go on this block just like so. You can either take this design, put it up against a window and transfer the design onto the other side of the paper so that it's on both sides. Transfer it on and then lay one side down, the side that's, or one of the trace sides down, and then go in and mark out around the shape once more, and the graphite will transfer to the design. So I went to a window, put the design side up against the window so that I could see the other side, and transferred the design onto the back side. Now I can place this down, and I didn't do the whole thing, but place this down and I can hold it in place and use the side of a marker or the end of your pencil to transfer the design on by rubbing against the paper to transfer the graphite to your block, and there you can see the graphite transferred. Now another way to do this that's slightly easier because it doesn't involve tracing everything out again, is to go in and place pieces of the transfer paper to your block. So I'm going to lay this over my block, get an idea of where the edges are. Okay, and then put your design on top, lining up the edges, line everything up. And I would suggest either holding it firmly down with your hand or taping the edges so that nothing moves around. And now you'll go in and you'll trace around all the shapes to transfer the color of the chalk through. So I'll go around all the shapes, tracing around them like so. And then once all of your lines are traced, lift up your design and gently lift up the transfer paper, and you can see the transferred pieces. I used partially yellow and partially blue, so I'll need to go in and outline all of these pieces that I sketched in, just so that as I'm working, as I'm brushing up against it, I don't rub the chalk off. If you trace the design onto the back of the paper and then rub it on and transferring the graphite, you'll want to go in and make sure all of your lines are clear still, so that you know exactly where the boundaries are as you start carving. Okay, it's all transferred on, so my lines are nice and clear for the carving process. There are a couple of things I want to go over before we start carving our block. First of all, you want to be aware of your posture when carving a lino cut. I'm working at a surface that is about a 90-degree angle for my arms, so my arms are at 90-degree angle and I'm able to stand up straight, and I'm not hunched over or bent over awkwardly over the work surface. You want to be able to stand up straight or sit down in a chair and work with a good amount of leverage. So when I'm working with the knife, I have a good amount of leverage, so I'm not way up here yanking on my shoulder, and I'm also not too low also yanking on my shoulder. So be aware of those things, either sitting or standing. And you also want to make sure that you are aware of where your hands are as you're carving. So you'll be working with the knife here, and I'll put in a blade here in a second, but you're going to be working with the knife and adding pressure and pushing down and out as you carve. And if you're doing that in your hands here and you slip, you can go right into your hand. So just like you would cut away from yourself with a box knife or other blade, be careful to have your hand out of the way as you're carving so that you can slip out into space and not into a body part. So that is posture safety and knife safety. The reason I bring up the posture is that the more work, more lino cuts you cut, the more you spend doing crafting, the more wear it can be on your body, and you don't want to get tired and fatigued and have back pain because you were doing something creative and fun. So being aware of that, even when you are having fun, is valuable. Okay, another thing that I want to point out here is that I have a lot of empty space here in the corners, and I could continue to keep this as a rectangle shape and just carve all of that space away, or fill that space in with more design if I wanted to add more leaves or circles or something out here to the outside space. And I could even go in and test that out by, let's see, I'll add some circles here and see if I like how that looks. And if I don't, which I'm not a fan of the circles, I can go in, and this is really easy to erase off. So if you're using a pencil, which I suggest, you can go in and erase any design lines that you don't like, and they'll go away. So let's try, maybe I do another layer of leaves all the way around, like so. I'm not a big fan of that either. So the other option, if I decide not to add any more design to the outside of this block, which I think I like it the way it is, you can go in and cut off the edges so you're not creating so much carving space for you to do. If you just want to focus on the central design, you can always leave this, as I said before, just like in the bird here, I left the background as part of the design so that you could see that. But I really want to focus on the diamond shape in the middle and keep the diamond shape throughout this design of the block. And so to do that, I'm actually going to cut away these corners, and so I end up with more of a diamond shaped altogether. And so I'm going to go in, and off of the edges of the leaves, I'm going to measure off 1/4 inch and mark a line 1/4 inch. So I end up with some space around the edges, but not this whole corner. So I'll do that all around the edge. Okay, so my lines are drawn in. Now I can go back in with my box knife and cut those edges off. And these scraps will be great for smaller blocks or lino cuts. I'm using the word lino cut and block interchangeably here. I'm keeping my hand out of the way, so I'm over here. If I slip, I'm just going this direction. And I'm cutting thin cut to create the incision, and then cutting along that line until it's cut through. Okay, so there it's trimmed down, and that's exactly what I'm going to be carving. Okay, so now let's set up this knife or the carving tool for carving. And I'm going to set it up with the medium V-shape blade. To do that, I'll put the end back on. To do that, you unscrew the tip, and there's half of the blade or half of the inside that has a space for the blade to slide in. And so you slide in the blade into that space and then twist the end tight, and that holds the blade in place. And so on this piece right here, I'll show you how you want to hold it. So I'm going to hold my 2 fingers here on the end to be able to press down. You can use 1 if you want, but I find 2 is stronger. And then hold the knife between my fingers. So it's kind of resting on my palm like this with the blade side down. So I'm just resting it across my palm, my 2 fingertips on the barrel here. And now, and the butt of the knife is in my palm. So now I can flip it, and I'm going to hold it at the angle which the knife blade is flat against the linoleum block, and then lift it slightly up from there. So my fingers are holding the block, but they're out of the way, back behind the knife. And I'm going in, I'm gonna press down. And to keep your shoulder safe and your wrist safe, make sure you have a straight line from your wrist up to your elbow, so you're not cranked like this, you're not over like this, trying to push like that. That doesn't give you enough force. You're gonna be pushing from your shoulder and your back, so push into the material and then fall. And so I'm at a 45-degree angle here. My fingers are out of the way, pushing down holding with this hand and pushing down with the other hand to get the cut. And practice a few times before you start to carve your block so that you get a handle of the control and how the blades work. So this knife has a very small V-shaped tip, and to use the knife you want to hold it at a 45-degree angle. So hold it about at this angle so that the blade is flush with the material that you're working with. So I'll go in here and hold my piece of linoleum flat against the table and then slowly press and cut into the linoleum. And it will remove a thin slice like so. So that's a very thin blade there. And then I'll go in and I'll do this next size up. And to use this tool, the top unscrews so that the tip opens up and you can put the blade in. These blades, there's the blade on one side and then the other side slides into the tip of the tool, like so. You gotta unscrew it enough that it slides in. Find where it fits in. There's a side that it'll slide in. Slide it in and then tighten the tool to hold the blade in place. Okay, and so then again, holding your tool 45-degree angle, the harder you press, the deeper the tool gouges into the material, and so the deeper your cut will be. Like so. So that's the medium V, and you unscrew it and then pull it out. Medium V, and then we'll do the large V. Okay, screw that in place. There we go. So slightly deeper, and this one has a more curved V shape, so the bottom isn't as pointed, it's more round. Okay, and then this is a very round tipped blade. Tighten this in. And so it creates a wider channel. So you can see these are gradually getting larger from more of a V-shaped gouge to a rounded gouge. And then this tool, this is an interesting tool. The shape is kind of a teardrop and the blade is very sharp. So be careful when you're inserting it into your handle because it's very sharp on both sides, and so you don't want to cut yourself. So this tool is great for outlining the edges of things that you're gonna of areas that you're going to remove. So like on this rubber stamp, using this tool to cut along the line of the stem would mean that it would be easier to remove the material around it without actually removing the stem on accident. So this tool you can cut in like this on the rounded edge, or use the point to press in using your pointer finger to press onto the handle, or even flip it and use the other side as well to create straight cut lines. And this is great, as I was saying, for the edges of design, because you can create the cut line and that acts as a barrier for the rest of your cuts. So you create the cut line and then you come in and you can do other cuts at different angle and it will stop where you created this barrier line. Okay, now before we start carving the block, I want to create a carving plan. So like on this bird, I keep showing you the bird, or the circle block, I worked in a circle around the circle block, so I just followed the lines of the circle to create or to remove the material. And on the bird, I wanted the hash in the background as if there were trees back there. And so I just went straight up, straight in rows up in the background. And that adds to the design of your block. And so to create the carving plan on your block, you'll want to decide, do you want some of the background to pop through in your prints, or do you want it to be completely gone? And I like the look of the background kind of popping out a little bit. And so that's part of my carving plan, is that I'm going to have some texture in the background that pops through. Another aspect is what direction you carve in, like the bird going straight up and down behind the bird. In my design, I could go around, like curve around the edges so that there's curves in the removed sections, like so. Or I could decide to go all in one direction or the other direction. Or another idea would be to split it in half and go vertical in one side and horizontal in the other side. You can play around with different ideas. And if you want to see what that might look like, you can go in and create some lines. Again, the pencil marks can be erased if you want to keep experimenting, or just leave them and they'll get carved away. So if I wanted to go horizontal there and vertical on this side, it would kind of look something like that. Or I could go around the leaves and do more curves like that, and then in circles around the circles, around the curve here. So I think I'm going to go more organic and do shapes around the shapes. So use the shape as the carving pattern. And so I'll be carving around these shapes. Now I suggest starting in the middle to carve. Start from the middle and working out, because you'll be removing material, and then as you get to the edges, you can go right off the edges as you're working away from the design that you're working with. If you start to go from the outside to the inside, you could accidentally cut away some of the design as your blade works into the material. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do on to start the carving process is just look over my lines and make sure they're where I want them throughout the design. And I can always alter them as I'm carving, but once you cut something away, you can't put it back. So making sure my shapes are clear and oriented the way I want them to be. Just doing a double check. Okay, so working from the center out, I'm going to start to carve around some of these shapes, to outline some of these shapes. And to do that, like we talked about earlier, I'm holding the knife at a 45-degree angle and pressing in with my hands behind to hold the block in place. And I'm working very slowly so that I can catch these curves. And then when I get to the end of where I want to cut or want to carve, you lift up, and that cuts away the end of that piece of rubber. And so then I'll go around this leaf here. And move away your scraps as you work so that you can see what you're doing. So I outlined that leaf, and then I'm going to create another line, another row of cutting around it so that it's nice and defined outline. Then I'll go up to this one. As you're carving, it can begin to be difficult to see where you've carved and where you haven't, and so going over it with your finger sometimes helps, because you can feel the difference. Also, lifting it up and looking at it is a good idea. As you're working, take a moment to glance up and look far away to give your eyes a break from looking close up as well. And when you do that, stop moving the knife so that you don't cut something you didn't mean to. And if your knife starts to slip as you're cutting, it might mean that you started to change the angle of the knife. So try to keep it at that 45-degree angle as you're working so that you keep gouging into the material. Okay, and then I need to look at this because I put in 2 leaves here and I'm not sure which one I wanted. So I think I'm going to go in with the pencil and outline it. There it is. You can always rotate the block as you're working so that it's easier to carve away. It's easier to move the block than try to rotate your body around the table, so feel free to do that. Okay, so there is the outline on all of that side. And now I'll go around the center circles. Circles are hard because you have to rotate the whole time you're carving. So if you can rotate with one hand and gently press down, well, firmly press down with the other hand that's holding the knife, you can get a nice circle around your circle shapes or your rounded shapes. So I'm basically holding the knife in the same position and just rotating the block so that the knife cuts away in a circle. Like so. Circles are definitely something you could practice on a scrap piece before going right to your shape, so that you get a feel for moving the material as you are carving. Now I'm cutting in a spiral around these center circles, so cutting away material, following that circle pattern. And once you've been doing this for a while, once you've done a couple blocks, your muscles will start to gain muscle memory as far as like how to hold the knife and being able to move things around and carve for a long period of time. But at first your body might get tired, so go ahead and take a break as you need to let your hands rest. Or give your shoulders and neck a break if you're bent over looking at your work. So because I'm touching the surface of the block so much in order to rotate it, the lines are getting pretty smudged and my surface is getting kind of dirty, which is okay because I'll be carving away most of it. But just keep in mind that you'll probably have to wipe it down after you've done carving it to remove all the graphite. Okay, and then I'll move on to this side. Again, working around the shapes, outlining them. You want to be careful around shapes because as you carve, what you carve away can't be replaced. So you don't want to remove too much. And as I said that, it created a small divot in my circle. And again. So just be gentle, and you can guide it with your finger if you need to. There, got that curve. But doing this outline of your shapes right away will help you from accidentally cutting into a shape when you don't mean to, because you'll create like a channel that you'll hit before you gouge out anything from your shape. Thanks so much for watching and carving a Linocut with me. I would love to see your projects if you create something. You can tag me on Instagram at TextileIndie or use the hashtag TextileIndie block printing. Subscribe below and like this video if you want more videos like this and basketry, natural dyeing, and other fiber arts. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.